I came home to find my wife sobbing on the kitchen floor, unable to speak, while my daughter stood over her claiming she did not know what happened. But when I checked the security cameras to find the truth, I was absolutely terrified by what I saw on the screen. My name is Douglas Mercer, and I spent 30 years as a forensic accountant for the FBI, tracking down cartels and corrupt politicians through their paper trails. I thought I had seen the absolute worst of humanity in those case files, but I was wrong. The worst of humanity was not in a federal prison. It was standing right in my living room wearing a designer dress I paid for. Before I tell you how I used a single hidden camera and a coffee stain to destroy the people who tried to break me, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that betrayal by blood demands a payback in cold, hard cash. I had been gone for only 3 days on a fishing trip up at the lake, a small retreat my wife Patricia insisted I take for my 72nd birthday. I walked through the front door of our colonial home in Connecticut, expecting the smell of Patricia's pot roast, or perhaps the sound of the radio. Instead, I heard a high-pitched wailing that made my blood freeze. I dropped my tackle box in the hallway and ran toward the kitchen. The scene before me was chaotic. My wife Patricia was curled up on the linoleum floor near the island, clutching her chest and rocking back and forth. Shattered porcelain was scattered everywhere, shards of her favorite Victorian tea set glinting under the recessed lights. My daughter Brittany was standing there, with her hands on her hips, shaking her head, while her husband Todd leaned against the counter, looking at his phone. When they saw me, Brittany immediately shifted her expression from annoyance to exaggerated panic. She rushed over and grabbed my arm. "Dad." "Thank God you are home early," she said, her voice pitching up into a theatrical whine. "Mom is having one of her episodes again. We just stopped by to drop off some groceries, and she started screaming that there were intruders. She threw the tea set at the wall, Dad. She is losing it." I looked down at Patricia. Her eyes were wide and terrified, but she wasn't looking at the wall or at some imaginary intruder. She was looking directly at Brittany. I knelt down beside my wife, ignoring the sharp ceramic shards digging into my knees. Patricia was trembling so violently, her teeth were chattering. I reached out to touch her shoulder, and she flinched as if I were about to strike her. That reaction set off an alarm bell in my head that I hadn't heard since my days in the field. Patricia had suffered a mild stroke 6 months ago, which left her weak and occasionally confused, but she had never been violent. Never. Todd finally looked up from his phone and sighed loud enough for me to hear. "Look, Doug, we hate to say this, but the doctor warned us about this decline. Dementia creates aggression. Brittany and I were just talking, and we think it is unsafe for her to be here anymore." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a glossy brochure. "I have already done the legwork for you. Golden Oaks Nursing Facility has a bed opening up this Friday. It is expensive, but for Patricia's safety, it is necessary." I took the brochure. My hand remained steady, but inside my chest my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at the brochure, and then I looked at the broken tea set. The blast radius of the debris was wrong. If Patricia had thrown it at the wall, the shards would be concentrated near the baseboard. Instead, the pieces were scattered in a radial pattern outward from the center of the room, as if the pot had been smashed directly onto the floor with force. I looked at Brittany. Her mascara was perfect. Her clothes were unruffled. A woman dealing with a violent dementia patient usually looks somewhat disheveled. Then I saw it. Patricia's cardigan had slid up her arm slightly. Just above her wristwatch, there was a fresh red mark. It was darkening quickly into a bruise. It was the distinct shape of a thumbprint. I made a choice in that split second. If I confronted them now, they would deny it. They would claim she fell or that I was the one who was senile. I needed to be the Douglas Mercer who sat across from money launderers and smiled while they incriminated themselves. I stood up and put on the mask of a tired, defeated old man. "You might be right," I said, keeping my voice low and weary. "She seems very confused. I just need to get her settled. Can you two give us a moment?" Brittany exchanged a look with Todd, a look of victory. "Of course, Dad," she said, patting my arm with a touch that felt like ice. "We will leave the brochure on the counter. Think about it. We only want what is best for Mom." They left the house, and I waited until I heard the engine of Todd's leased BMW fade down the driveway. I spent the next hour cleaning up the porcelain and getting Patricia into bed. I gave her the evening medication and sat by her side until her breathing evened out into a fitful sleep. She didn't speak a single word to me. She just gripped my hand so tight, her knuckles turned white. At midnight, the house was silent. I went downstairs to my study and locked the door. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. My hands were shaking now that the adrenaline had worn off, but I forced myself to focus. Last week, I had noticed that Patricia's heart medication seemed to be depleting faster than the dosage required. Suspecting a cleaning lady, or perhaps a pharmacy error, I had installed a pinhole camera inside the smoke detector in the kitchen. It was a high-definition wide-angle lens with audio capability classified as Camera 4 on my home network. I logged into the server and scrolled back to the timestamp. 2 hours before I arrived home. I clicked play. The video feed loaded in crisp 4K resolution. I watched as Brittany and Todd entered the kitchen. They didn't have groceries. They had a stack of documents. Patricia was sitting at the breakfast table drinking tea. She looked peaceful. On the screen, Brittany slammed the papers onto the table. "Sign it, Mom," she shouted. The audio picked up the distortion in her voice. It wasn't the sweet voice of my daughter. It was the guttural growl of a desperate woman. Patricia looked confused. "Brittany, I told you I cannot sign over the trust fund without your father. He handles the finances." Todd stepped into the frame. He was pacing. "We don't have time for Doug to look over this," he snapped. His back was to the camera, but I could see his reflection in the glass of the oven door. His face was twisted in rage. "I owe these guys $500,000 by the first of the month, Patricia. If I don't pay, they break my legs. Do you want that on your conscience?" I paused the video. My breath caught in my throat. $500,000. I knew Todd's startup was failing, but I had no idea he was leveraged that deep with loan sharks. I had bailed him out 5 years ago when he gambled away their first mortgage. I thought he had learned his lesson. I was a fool. I resumed the video. Patricia stood up. "I am not signing anything," she said firmly. "You need to leave." That was when it happened. Brittany stepped forward and slapped her mother across the face. The sound was sickening, a sharp crack that echoed through my laptop speakers. Patricia stumbled back, shock registering on her face before she began to cry. "Don't you dare walk away from me," Brittany screamed. She grabbed Patricia by the shoulders and shoved her down into the chair. Todd grabbed the antique teapot from the table. I thought he was going to hit her with it. Instead, he smashed it onto the floor right next to Patricia's feet. Shards flew everywhere. "Sign the papers," old woman Todd hissed, leaning down into her face. He picked up a jagged piece of porcelain and held it inches from her wrist. "Or maybe you want another accident. Maybe this time you fall down the stairs. Doug isn't here to save you." I watched as my wife sobbed, shaking in terror, while my daughter and son-in-law stood over her like vultures. The video ended with them hearing my car in the driveway. The transformation was instant. Brittany smoothed her hair. Todd kicked the papers under the refrigerator. They prepared their faces to lie to me. I sat in the dark for a long time. The glow of the monitor was the only light in the room. I felt a coldness spreading through my chest, replacing the heat of my anger. This was not a family dispute. This was a crime scene. I inserted 3 encrypted USB drives into the hub and began copying the footage. I saved it to the cloud. I saved it to a remote server I used for my consulting work. I made sure that video existed in places they could never touch. I could have called the police right then. I had enough for assault and elder abuse. But as I watched Todd threaten my wife, I realized that prison was too good for them. If I arrested them now, they would claim it was a one-time emotional outburst. They would get a good lawyer. They would get probation. And most importantly, they would still think they were smarter than me. No. I wanted to hurt them where it truly mattered. I wanted to hit them in their wallets. I closed the laptop. The forensic accountant in me took the wheel. I needed to trace the debt. I needed to know exactly who Todd owed money to and why Brittany was so desperate she would strike her own mother. I would play the part of the frail, confused old man. I would dangle the carrot. The next morning, I woke up early and brewed a pot of coffee. The smell usually comforted me, but today, it just smelled like burnt expectations. I heard the front door unlock. Brittany and Todd let themselves in using the spare key I had given them for emergencies. They walked into the kitchen radiating a nervous energy. "Good morning, Dad," Brittany said too loudly. Her eyes scanned the room looking for Patricia. "How is Mom doing?" "She is resting," I said, turning my back to them to pour 3 mugs. "I barely slept last night thinking about what you said. About Golden Oaks." I placed the mugs on the table and sat down heavily, letting my shoulders slump. I rubbed my forehead, feigning a headache. "You are right. I cannot take care of her alone. And if her aggression is getting worse, I might be in danger too." Todd sat down so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I am glad you are being sensible, Doug. It is really for the best. There is just one problem," I said, looking into my black coffee. "The monthly cost at Golden Oaks is $12,000. My pension covers our living expenses, but it won't cover that." I let the silence hang there for a moment. I could feel them exchanging glances. I continued, my voice trembling slightly. "I think I have to sell some assets. I have a portfolio of tech stocks I bought in the 90s. It is worth about $4 million now. I was saving it for you two, actually. But I suppose I have to liquidate it to pay for the nursing home." The air left the room. $4 million. I saw Todd's pupils dilate. He licked his lips. Brittany gripped the edge of the table. "Dad," she said, her voice shaky, "you don't have to sell everything. That takes time. You need a power of attorney. If you sign control over to us, we can manage the liquidation. We can make sure Mom gets the best care, and we can protect the rest of the capital. You know, so the taxman doesn't take half of it." Todd leaned in. "Exactly, Doug. You are grieving. You are stressed. You shouldn't be dealing with brokers and bankers right now. Let us handle the burden." He pulled a document out of his briefcase. It was the same document they had tried to force Patricia to sign yesterday. They had just changed the name at the top to Douglas Mercer. I looked at the paper. It was a general power of attorney granting them full access to all bank accounts, real estate, and investment portfolios. It was a death warrant for my financial existence. I reached for my reading glasses, moving slowly. I picked up a pen. I saw Brittany holding her breath. Todd was practically vibrating with anticipation. This was it. The moment they had been waiting for. The payday that would clear his gambling debts and pay off her credit cards. I brought the pen tip to the paper. Then I reached for my coffee mug with my other hand. I allowed a tremor to run through my arm. A violent geriatric twitch. My hand jerked. The mug tipped over. Hot black coffee flooded across the table, soaking the document instantly. The dark liquid spread over the legal text, turning the crisp white paper into a brown, soggy mess. "Oh no!" I exclaimed, dropping the pen. "Look at me. I am so clumsy. I am sorry." Todd jumped up, cursing under his breath. He tried to grab the paper, but it tore in his hands. "Damn it, Doug," he muttered before catching himself. Brittany's face was a mask of pure fury, but she forced it back into a smile. "It is okay, Dad. It is just an accident. We can print another one." I stood up, grabbing a towel to dab at the mess. I am just so shaken. Maybe this is a sign. I should have my lawyer Harper look at this before we reprint it, just to make sure we are doing it right tax-wise. You know how strict the IRS is these days. The mention of Harper, my ruthless estate attorney, made Todd flinch. No, Dad, Brittany said quickly. We don't need Harper. He charges so much. We can just print it out here. I paused, looking her dead in the eye. No, Brittany. If I am going to hand over $4 million, I want to do it properly. I will call Harper today. We can meet next week. Next week, Todd choked out. But the bed at Golden Oaks. We'll be there next week, I said firmly. Or we will find another one. I am not rushing into this. I walked to the sink to rinse the towel. I could feel their eyes burning holes in my back. They were desperate. They had a deadline I didn't know about yet, and I had just pushed them past it. Okay, Dad, Brittany said, her voice tight. We will come back tomorrow, just to check on Mom. As they left, I saw Todd kick the tire of my car in the driveway. He was unraveling. Good. Angry people make mistakes, and I was going to be there to record every single one of them. I went upstairs to check on Patricia. She was awake, staring at the ceiling. I sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand. Her thumb stroked the back of my hand, a silent question. I leaned in close. I saw everything on the camera, I whispered. I know what they did. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. She tried to pull her hand away, ashamed, but I held it tighter. They want the money, I said quietly, and they are going to try to take it. But I need you to be strong, Pat. I need you to trust me. We are going to play a game. What game? She whispered, her voice hoarse. The game where they think they are the hunters, I said, smoothing her hair. But they are actually the bait. That afternoon, I drove into the city not to see my lawyer, but to visit the one place Todd never wanted me to go. The grim, nondescript office building in the industrial district that housed the shell company, listed on his business card. I parked down the street and watched. I didn't have to wait long. At 2 p.m., a black SUV pulled up. 2 men in ill-fitting suits got out. They didn't look like investors. They looked like problems. They banged on the door of Todd's office. I raised my camera with the telephoto lens and started snapping pictures. 5 minutes later, Todd came out. He looked disheveled. One of the men shoved him against the brick wall. I zoomed in. The man was shouting. Todd was pleading, his hands held up in surrender. I captured the fear in his eyes, the desperation. Then the man did something that confirmed my suspicions. He checked his watch and held up 3 fingers. 3 days. Todd had 3 days to come up with the money, or something bad was going to happen. I lowered the camera. 3 days. That was the timeline. That was why they were pushing for the nursing home so aggressively. If they got power of attorney, they could liquidate my stocks within 48 hours. I drove home with a plan forming in my mind. A plan that would require nerves of steel. I was going to let them think they were winning. I was going to let them push me to the edge. And right when they reached out to push me off, I was going to step aside and let them fall into the abyss they had dug for themselves. When I got home, the house was quiet, but something felt wrong. The air felt heavy. I walked into the kitchen and saw that the smoke detector, my camera 4, was hanging open. The wire had been cut. My heart stopped. Had they found it? I walked over and inspected it. No, it wasn't found. The battery compartment was just open. The battery was gone. Brittany must have taken it for something else, perhaps a remote control, thinking it was just a regular smoke detector. They didn't know about the lens. But then I saw the note on the counter. It was in Brittany's handwriting. Dad took Mom for ice cream. Don't wait up, ice cream. Patricia was diabetic. She hadn't eaten ice cream in 10 years. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my calm facade. This wasn't a treat. This was a hostage situation. I pulled out my phone and dialed Harper. Harper, I said, as soon as he answered. Activate the clean slate protocol and get me the file on Todd's bankruptcy. We are moving up the timeline. Why? Doug Harper asked, his voice professional but concerned. What changed? They took her, I said, staring at the empty space where my wife's wheelchair usually sat. And Harper, I'm going to need that forensic team you mentioned. I am going to audit my son-in-law so hard his ancestors will feel it. I hung up and looked at the black screen of my phone. The game of cat and mouse was over. The hunt had begun. The drive to the First National Bank felt different that morning. For 20 years, I had driven these streets as a father and a husband, but today I drove them as an investigator. I parked my sedan in the furthest spot from the entrance and sat for a moment watching the heavy glass doors swing open and shut. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I did not look like a man on a warpath. I looked like a retiree wearing a beige windbreaker and reading glasses on a chain. Good. Camouflage is the first rule of engagement. I walked into the lobby, and the smell of stale coffee and sanitized money hit me. I bypassed the line of people waiting for the tellers and went straight to the glass office in the back. The branch manager was a man named Peterson, who I had known since he was a junior loan officer. He stood up immediately when he saw me offering a hand that felt too clammy. Mr. Mercer, this is a surprise, Peterson said, guiding me to a leather chair. I thought you were up at the lake. How is Patricia? She is struggling, I said, letting my voice crack just enough to sell the performance. That is actually why I am here. We are putting our affairs in order. Peterson nodded with practiced sympathy. Of course. How can I help? I need to access the records for the small business loan from 2018, I said. The one for that tech consulting firm my son-in-law started. Peterson frowned, tapping on his keyboard. Mr. Mercer, I believe Todd closed that credit line last year. He refinanced with another lender. I don't think you have access anymore. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on his mahogany desk. I stared at him over the rim of my glasses. Check the fine print, Peterson. I was the cosigner, the primary guarantor. Unless he paid off the principal in full with a certified check, which we both know Todd has never done in his life, my name is still on the master file. And as the guarantor, I have the right to audit the account activity to ensure my liability is covered. Peterson hesitated, then typed in a command. His eyes scanned the screen and his eyebrows shot up. You are right. Your name is still attached as the secondary liability holder. The account isn't closed. It is actually in arrears. Print it, I said. All of it. Every transaction for the last 24 months. And while you are at it, pull the credit inquiry report. I want to know who else has been looking at his financials. The printer hummed in the corner, a rhythmic sound like a heartbeat. Peterson handed me a stack of warm paper. I put on my reading glasses and the world around me faded away. I was no longer in a bank in Connecticut. I was back in the bureau, analyzing the decay of a criminal enterprise. The numbers on the page were not just digits. They were a confession. I started with the business expenses, or rather, the lack of them. There were no payments for server space, no payroll for developers, no marketing costs. Todd's company was a ghost ship. Instead, I saw a pattern of transfers that made my stomach turn. $5,000 to an entity called Golden Chip Holdings in the Cayman Islands. 3 days later, another $10,000. 2 days after that, $15,000. I recognized the routing number. It wasn't an investment firm. It was a shell corporation used by unauthorized online gambling sites to bypass federal banking regulations. I took out my red pen and started circling the dates. The frequency was escalating. At first it was once a month, then weekly. In the last 6 months, it was daily. Todd wasn't just a bad businessman. He was a degenerate gambler chasing a losing streak that had spiraled into madness. I did the mental math, adding up the transfers in the margins. He had burned through $300,000 of the business loan. But that wasn't the worst part. The credit report showed 3 hard inquiries from a collection agency based in New Jersey. I knew that agency. They were the polite front for a syndicate that broke kneecaps when the interest payments stopped. The debt wasn't just $300,000. With the vigorish and the penalties, he owed them $500,000. I flipped the page to the authorized user section. Brittany. My daughter had a supplementary credit card attached to the business account for office supplies. I scanned her transaction history. It was a grotesque display of vanity. $2,000 at a luxury boutique in Manhattan, $4,000 for a weekend at a spa resort, $1,200 for a handbag. There were charges for cosmetic procedures, private Pilates sessions, and Michelin star dinners. She had spent $80,000 in 1 year. $80,000. I closed my eyes for a second, remembering Brittany as a little girl, saving her allowance to buy me a tie for Father's Day. That girl was dead. The woman who replaced her was filling the void in her soul with designer labels bought with stolen money. She wasn't protecting her mother from dementia. She was protecting her lifestyle from bankruptcy. I looked up at Peterson. He was watching me nervously. "Is it bad, Doug?" he asked, dropping the formalities. "It is worse than bad," I said, keeping my voice flat. "It is theft. But I need one more thing. I need to see the pending transactions." Peterson clicked his mouse. "Nothing penned—" "Wait." His face went pale. He leaned closer to the monitor, squinting, as if the screen was playing a trick on him. "What is it?" I asked. The tone of my voice made him jump. An alert just popped up. Peterson stammered. "A withdrawal request. It was flagged by the system because of the amount." How much I demanded. $50,000, Peterson whispered. "Cash withdrawal. It is happening at the branch on 4th Street. Right now." I stood up so fast my chair hit the wall. 4th Street was only 10 minutes away. "Who is authorizing it?" I asked. Peterson turned the screen toward me. "It is a countercheck, Doug. It has your signature on it." I looked at the digital scan of the check on the screen. It was a masterpiece of forgery. The loop of the D was perfect. The slant of the M was identical to mine. Todd had obviously spent hours practicing this. He had traced my signature from old birthday cards or tax documents. But he had made one fatal mistake. One tiny, arrogant error. 3 years ago, after my identity was briefly compromised in a data breach, I had started adding a microscopic dot inside the bottom loop of the letter G in my signature. It was invisible to the naked eye but clear to a forensic accountant. The signature on the screen did not have the dot. "Freeze it," I ordered. Peterson looked at me terrified. "I cannot just freeze an account without a fraud affidavit, Doug. If it is your signature—" "It is not my signature," I snarled, slamming my hand on the desk. "That is a forgery. And the man standing at the counter on 4th Street is committing a federal felony. Do not decline the transaction, Peterson. That will just scare him off. Flag it for manual review. Tell the teller to say the vault is on a time lock and he has to wait 20 minutes. Peterson reached for the phone, his hands shaking. "What are you going to do?" "I am going to let him sweat," I said, gathering the evidence into my briefcase. "I am going to let him stand there watching the clock thinking he has won. I want him to feel the money in his hands, in his imagination. And then I want him to walk out empty-handed." But Doug, Peterson said, holding the phone to his ear, "If he owes money to the people I think he owes money to, if he walks out without that cash, then he is a dead man walking." I finished for him. I walked out of the bank into the bright morning sunlight. The evidence in my briefcase felt heavy, like a brick of lead. I had the paper trail. I had the motive. I knew exactly why they had kidnapped my wife. They needed to liquidate her trust fund to cover the hole they had dug. Todd was at the 4th Street branch right now, checking his watch, sweating in his cheap suit, waiting for $50,000 that was never coming. I pulled out my phone and opened the app for the hidden GPS tracker I had installed on Todd's car months ago, a habit from my old life I never shook. The dot was blinking at the 4th Street bank. I could have driven there. I could have confronted him in the lobby and humiliated him in front of everyone. But that was emotional. That was messy. Douglas Mercer didn't do messy. Instead, I dialed Harper's number. "Harper," I said as I got into my car, "I have the financial motive. It is gambling and embezzlement. Significant amounts." I heard Harper typing furiously on the other end. "Good work, Doug. That elevates this from a family dispute to criminal fraud. We can get an emergency injunction." "Not yet," I said, watching a young couple walk past, holding hands, oblivious to the war I was fighting. "I want more. I want to catch them when they think they are safe." "Todd is trying to forge my signature right now. I stopped the transaction, but I didn't alert him. He is going to be desperate, Harper. Desperate men do reckless things." "What is your next move?" Harper asked. "I'm going back to the house," I said, starting the engine. "If Todd doesn't get the cash from the bank, he is going to come for the only other liquid asset he has access to. He is going to hunt for the safe in my study. And when he does, I will be waiting." I hung up and pulled out of the parking lot. The numbers in my head were rearranging themselves. $500,000 debt. $80,000 shopping. $50,000 attempted theft. They were drowning, and they had tried to use my wife as a life raft. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. They had made a calculation that I was weak, that I was old, that I was a statistic. They were about to find out that they had miscalculated. And in my line of work, a calculation error is always fatal. I merged onto the highway, my eyes fixed on the road ahead, but my mind already 3 moves ahead on the chessboard. The game had just entered the endgame. Tracking a subject is an art form that requires patience and the ability to become invisible. I sat in my nondescript sedan 3 cars back, watching Todd weave through the mid-morning traffic like a man running from his own shadow. He wasn't heading toward the industrial park, where his failing company was supposedly landing new contracts. He was heading toward the riverfront district, a place of glass high-rises and overpriced bistros where a cup of coffee cost more than my first hourly wage. I kept a safe distance. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind was racing through the financial data I had just uncovered at the bank. Todd was drowning in debt, yet here he was driving into the most expensive zip code in the city. It was a paradox that only a narcissist could justify. He pulled into the valet parking of the Sapphire Towers, a luxury condominium complex that catered to the city's young elite. I parked across the street near a newsstand and adjusted my rearview mirror. I watched as Todd stepped out of his car. He checked his hair in the reflection of the window, smoothed his jacket, and handed the valet a tip that I knew he couldn't afford. He didn't go inside immediately. He stood by the fountain, checking his watch. A few minutes later, the glass doors opened and a woman walked out. She was young, perhaps half my age, with blonde hair styled in loose waves and carrying a designer bag that matched the one Brittany had bought last month. But unlike my daughter, who wore her anxiety like a heavy coat, this woman radiated a carefree arrogance. She walked straight to Todd and kissed him. It wasn't a friendly peck on the cheek. It was a claim of ownership. I felt a surge of nausea, not because of the infidelity itself, but because of the betrayal of my daughter. Brittany was at home right now, terrified about losing her house, terrified about her mother's health, and believing that her husband was out working to save them. Instead, he was here playing the role of the wealthy benefactor. They walked arm in arm to an outdoor cafe adjacent to the building. It was crowded, which was perfect for me. I grabbed my hat and sunglasses and exited my car. I moved with the slow, shuffled gait of an old man who had nowhere to be. It was the perfect disguise. No one looks twice at a retiree reading a newspaper. I took a table 2 rows behind them, blocked by a large potted fern. I ordered an iced tea and placed my phone on the table face down. The microphone app was already running calibrated to pick up directional audio. I put in my wireless earbud, and suddenly the background noise of traffic faded away, replaced by the clear, amplified voices of my son-in-law and his mistress. "You look tense, baby," the woman said. Her voice was light, unburdened by the reality of overdue notices. Todd sighed, the sound of a man carrying the weight of his own lies. "It is just the old man," he said. "Doug is being difficult. He almost signed the power of attorney yesterday, but he spilled coffee all over it. I think he is starting to lose it, just like his wife." The woman giggled. "Well, you said it would be done by Friday. My lease is up next month, Todd. You promised me we would be looking at penthouses, not renewing my lease here." I gripped my glass of iced tea. Penthouses. He was promising her a penthouse while he was about to put my wife in a state-funded facility because he claimed we were broke. "Don't worry," Todd said, his voice dropping lower, conspiring. "I have it under control. We are moving the timeline up. I am putting Patricia in Golden Oaks this week. Once she is locked away, Doug will collapse. He cannot function without her. I will declare him incompetent by Monday." I froze. Declare me incompetent. That was the plan. Not just to take the money, but to strip me of my legal rights, to erase me. "And the house?" the woman asked, sipping her wine. "Sold," Todd said, confident. "A developer is already interested. $4 million for the portfolio plus the house. That is enough to pay off my investors, and still have plenty left for us. We can finally take that trip to Paris. Just you and me. No nagging wife, no crying kids." I listened to him sell my life, my home, and my wife's dignity for a vacation and a mistress. He spoke about us as if we were livestock to be liquidated. There was no remorse in his voice, only the cold calculation of a parasite looking for its next host. "Brittany thinks we are broke," the woman said, pausing. "Won't she notice when you suddenly have millions?" Todd laughed, a cruel, dismissive sound. "Brittany believes whatever I tell her. I will tell her the money is tied up in trusts, that we can only access a small stipend. She is so desperate to keep up appearances, she won't ask questions. She is weak. That is why I need you. You are strong." I had heard enough. I slowly reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my compact camera. It was small, but it had a professional-grade lens. I waited for the perfect moment. I waited until Todd reached across the table and held her hand, looking into her eyes, with that practiced sincerity he had used on my daughter for 10 years. I aimed through the gap in the fern leaves. Click. I caught the intimacy, the smile, the wine bottle. Then I waited again. I waited until the check came. I watched Todd pull out a credit card. I zoomed in on the card as he placed it on the tray. It was a corporate card. My corporate card. The one attached to the account I had co-signed. He was paying for his mistress's lunch with my money. Click, click, click. I took a dozen photos. I captured the address of the building. I captured the license plate of her car when the valet brought it around. I documented every second of his betrayal. As they stood up to leave, Todd pulled her close and whispered something that made her laugh. They looked like the perfect couple. Successful, happy, young. They had no idea that the old man sitting 2 tables away, adjusting his hearing aid, had just loaded the gun that would end their world. I waited until they were gone before I stood up. My legs felt heavy, not from age, but from the burden of the truth. I had gone looking for financial fraud, and I had found moral bankruptcy. I looked at the photos on the small digital screen. Todd's face was clear. There was no denying this. This wasn't just evidence for a divorce court. This was the leverage I needed to separate the wolves. Brittany was a participant in the scheme against me, yes, but she was motivated by fear and manipulation. Todd was the architect. If I showed these photos to Brittany, she would shatter. And in her shattered state, she might be willing to turn on him to save herself. I walked back to my car, feeling a cold resolve settle over me. The heartbreak was gone, replaced by a tactical clarity. Todd wanted to send me to a home. He wanted to sell my house. He wanted to erase me. He had made the classic mistake of the amateur criminal. He assumed his victim was asleep. But I wasn't asleep. I was wide awake. And I was about to turn his dream of Paris into a nightmare of prison bars and empty pockets. I started the engine and checked the time. It was early afternoon. I had the financial records. I had the photographic evidence. Now I needed to prepare the stage for the final act. I drove home slowly, rehearsing the lines I would say when I walked through the door. I would have to look at my daughter, knowing her husband was cheating on her, and say nothing. I would have to look at Todd, knowing he planned to declare me insane and shake his hand. It would be the hardest performance of my life. But for Patricia, for the woman who had stood by me for 40 years, I would become the greatest actor the world had ever seen. The storm was coming, Todd, and you just bought yourself a front-row ticket. Driving back from the city with the evidence of Todd's infidelity burning a hole in my pocket, I felt a different kind of urgency. The anger I had felt in the cafe was replaced by a cold knot of anxiety in my stomach. I knew they were desperate. I knew they had a deadline. And desperate people do not just make financial mistakes. They make physical threats. I pulled into the driveway and noticed that Brittany's car was gone. The house stood silent against the gray afternoon sky. It looked like the sanctuary it had been for 40 years, but as I walked up the front steps, I knew it was now a crime scene. I unlocked the door and called out for Patricia. There was no answer. I moved quickly through the hallway, dropping my keys on the side table. Patricia was usually in the sunroom at this hour reading her mystery novels or knitting. I found her there, but she wasn't knitting. She was slumped in her favorite armchair, her head lolling to the side at an unnatural angle. Her mouth was slightly open and a thin line of drool trailed down her chin. My heart stopped. For a second I thought she was dead. "Pat," I whispered, rushing to her side. I grabbed her wrist. Her pulse was there, but it was slow. Too slow. Her eyes fluttered open, but they didn't focus. She looked through me, not at me. "Who are you?" she slurred. Her words were thick, like her tongue was too big for her mouth. I want to go home." "We are home, Pat," I said, smoothing the hair back from her clammy forehead. "You are safe." She shook her head weakly. "No." The man said, "I have to sleep." I froze. "What man?" "Todd." I looked at the side table next to her chair. Her daily pill organizer was sitting there open. The compartment for Tuesday afternoon was empty. I knew Patricia's routine. She took a beta blocker for her arrhythmia and a mild vitamin supplement after lunch. Neither of those drugs caused this kind of catatonic stupor. I grabbed the pill organizer and looked at the compartments for the rest of the week. The pills looked right. They were small, round, and white, just like her heart medication. To the untrained eye, they were identical. But I wasn't an untrained eye. I had spent decades looking for microdots on counterfeit currency and analyzing ink compounds on forged ledgers. I picked up one of the pills from the Wednesday compartment and held it up to the light. My heart medication was a generic brand stamped with the code M42. The pill in my hand was stamped with a different code, Xanax 2. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't heart medication. This was a high-dose benzodiazepine, a powerful sedative used to treat severe anxiety and panic disorders. In an elderly patient with a history of stroke, A dose this high wouldn't just make them sleepy. It would induce confusion, memory loss, and motor control failure. It mimics the exact symptoms of advanced dementia. They weren't just waiting for her to decline. They were manufacturing the decline. They were poisoning her to prove to the doctors and the courts that she was incompetent. I went to the kitchen and found the prescription bottle in the cabinet. The label said metoprolol, but the pills inside were all switched. Brittany must have done it while I was out. She had swapped the contents, knowing that if the paramedics or social workers came, they would only check the label on the bottle. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles turning white. This was attempted murder. If Patricia took too many of these with her weak heart, she could go into respiratory arrest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive over to Todd's office and beat him until he couldn't stand. But I stopped myself. Violence was their language. Strategy was mine. If I called the police now, they would claim it was a mistake. They would say Patricia got confused and mixed up old bottles. They would say I was the one who mixed them up because I was old and senile. Without video proof of the switch, it was my word against theirs. And right now, my word was worth nothing because they had already planted the seeds of doubt about my mental state. Number 1. I had to be smarter. I ran upstairs to the master bathroom and dug through my travel kit. I always kept an emergency supply of our medications in there for trips. I found the real bottle of heart medication. I went back downstairs and emptied the poisoned pills into a plastic bag, which I hid inside the hollow leg of the dining room table. Then I refilled the prescription bottle and her weekly organizer with the real heart medication. Now came the hardest part. I went back to the sunroom. I took a wet cloth and wiped Patricia's face. I made her drink 2 glasses of water to help flush the sedative out of her system. It took an hour, but slowly the fog began to lift. Her eyes regained that sharp intelligence I had fallen in love with 50 years ago. "Doug," she whispered, gripping my hand. I felt so strange. I felt like I was drowning on dry land. "I know," I said quietly, kissing her knuckles. "I know what they did, Pat. They switched your pills. They are trying to make you look crazy so they can put you away." Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Her own daughter. The betrayal hit her harder than the drug. She started to cry silent tears that ran down her cheeks. "Why, Doug? Why are they doing this?" "Because they are drowning in debt, and they think we are the only thing standing between them and $4 million, I explained. I looked deep into her eyes. "Pat, listen to me." I switched the pills back. "You are going to be fine physically, but we have to do something very difficult." "What do you mean?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "We cannot let them know we know," I said. "Not yet. We need them to believe their plan is working. We need them to bring the contract. We need them to commit the crime in front of witnesses." Patricia looked at me confused. "I need you to act," I said. "When Brittany comes back tomorrow, or when that social worker arrives, I need you to pretend you are still on those sedatives. I need you to be confused. I need you to ask for your mother. I need you to forget who I am." Patricia recoiled. "Doug, I cannot do that. It is too painful." "You have to," I urged her. "If they think the drugs aren't working, they might try something worse. They might try to push you down the stairs like Todd threatened. We have to make them feel safe. We have to make them think they have won." She looked at the broken tea set that I had glued back together on the shelf. She looked at the photo of Brittany on the mantelpiece from her high school graduation. Then she looked back at me, and her expression hardened. The softness of the mother was gone, replaced by the resolve of a survivor. "Okay," she whispered. "I will do it. I will give them the show of a lifetime." That night we sat in the dark, holding hands, rehearsing. It was a macabre theater. I quizzed her on how to act disoriented. I taught her how to slur her speech just enough to be convincing, but not enough to seem like a medical emergency. At 7 p.m., the phone rang. It was Brittany. I put it on speaker and nodded to Patricia. "Hi, Dad," Brittany said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "How is Mom? Did she take her medicine?" Patricia leaned toward the phone. She took a deep breath. "Who is that?" she called out, her voice trembling and high-pitched. "Is that the lady from the church? Tell her I don't want any cookies. The cookies are full of spiders." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then I heard Brittany exhale a breath that sounded like relief. "Oh wow, she sounds really bad, Dad," Brittany said. "See? I told you. The decline is accelerating. I played my part. I don't know what to do." "Brittany," I stammered. "She doesn't even recognize the cat." "Stay calm, Dad," Brittany said, and I could practically hear her smiling. "I have arranged for the social worker to come tomorrow morning for the final assessment. Just keep her comfortable. It will all be over soon." "Yes," I said, looking at my wife, who was now sitting up straight and sipping her tea with perfect composure. "It will all be over soon." I hung up the phone. Patricia looked at me and winked. "How was that?" she asked. "Oscar-worthy," I said. But inside I was burning. They were relieved that their mother was seeing spiders. They were happy that she was losing her mind. That was the final nail in the coffin of my fatherly love. Tomorrow, they would bring the social worker. They would bring the forms. They would walk into this house expecting to find two helpless victims. Instead, they were walking into a bear trap, and I had just sharpened the teeth. "Get some sleep, Pat," I said, helping her up. "You have a big performance tomorrow." As I turned off the lights downstairs, I checked the hidden camera in the smoke detector. I had replaced the battery and added a backup power source. I checked the audio levels. Everything was ready. Let them come. Let them bring their lies and their greed. We were ready to play our roles, and unlike them, we knew how the play was going to end. The doorbell rang at 9 o'clock sharp. It was not a friendly sound. It sounded like a gavel hitting a judge's bench. I was sitting in the living room wearing my oldest cardigan, the one with the frayed cuffs. Patricia was upstairs, resting, or rather pretending to rest, as we had agreed. I watched through the sheer curtains as a silver sedan pulled up behind Brittany's car. A man stepped out. He was wearing a suit that was slightly too shiny and carrying a briefcase that looked like it had never seen the inside of a courtroom. This was the executioner my daughter had hired. Brittany opened the door before he could knock. She was wearing her performance face. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she had been crying all morning, and her posture was slumped with the weight of imaginary burdens. "Come in, Mr. Garris," she whispered loud enough for me to hear. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. We are just desperate. We don't know what else to do." They walked into the living room. Mr. Garris was a small man with shifting eyes and the smell of stale cigarette smoke clinging to his polyester jacket. He didn't look at me. He looked at the antique clock on the mantelpiece and the oil paintings on the walls. He was appraising the inventory, not the patient. "Dad, this is Mr. Garris," Brittany said, guiding him to the sofa opposite me. "He is a senior case worker from the Department of Elder Services. He is here to just have a chat with you, to see how you are doing." I slowly lowered my newspaper and looked at them over the rim of my glasses. I let my mouth hang open slightly, a trick I learned from observing suspects who wanted to appear harmless, who I asked, keeping my voice thin and reedy. "Is he the man for the gutters?" Brittany let out a choked sob and turned to Garris. "You see, he thinks you are the handyman. He doesn't even know what day it is most of the time. Yesterday he tried to make toast and almost burned the kitchen down. I had to disconnect the stove." I gripped the armrest of my chair. That was a lie. A bold, vicious lie. I hadn't touched the stove in a week because Brittany had been ordering takeout to keep us sedated with sodium and grease. But I couldn't defend myself. Defending myself would make me look aggressive. Aggression was a symptom of dementia. Silence was my only shield. Mr. Garris opened his briefcase and pulled out a clipboard. He clicked his pen. Mr. Mercer, I am going to ask you a few simple questions. There is no need to be nervous. I am not nervous, I muttered, looking at the floor. I just want my tea. Question 1, Garris said, his tone bored. Can you tell me what year it is? I paused. I knew exactly what year it was. I knew the date, the time, and the current stock price of the S&P 500. But Douglas Mercer, the victim, didn't know. It is... I squinted at the window. It is 19... No. It is 2002. Garris made a check mark on his paper. He didn't even look up. 2002. Okay. Can you tell me the name of the current president? I stayed silent for a long time. I watched a fly buzz against the window pane. I watched Brittany twisting her wedding ring round and round her finger. She was nervous. She needed this man to sign that paper. I don't follow politics, I said finally. It just makes people argue. Brittany leaned forward. Dad, you know this. We talked about it this morning. See, Mr. Garris, his short-term memory is completely shot. He tells me the same stories about his childhood over and over again, but he cannot remember what he ate for breakfast. Garris nodded, scribbling furiously. He wasn't writing notes. I could see the angle of his pen. He was just filling in bubbles on a predetermined form. He had walked into this house with his mind already made up. Let us try a physical test, Garris said. He pulled out a blank sheet of paper and a thick marker. I want you to draw a clock face for me, Mr. Mercer. Put all the numbers in the circle and set the hands to 10 past 11. This was the standard mini mental state examination. It was designed to test visuospatial function. I took the marker. My hand shook. This time I didn't have to fake the tremor. The rage inside me was making my whole body vibrate. I was a man who had built a career on precision, on analyzing complex fractals of financial fraud, and now I was being asked to draw a circle like a toddler. I drew the circle. It was lopsided. I wrote the numbers, but I crowded them all onto the right side of the face, leaving the left side empty. It is a classic sign of parietal lobe damage. I had studied this. I knew exactly how to fail. When I finished, I put the pen down and looked at Brittany. She was smiling. It was a small, triumphant smile that she tried to hide behind her hand, but I saw it. She wasn't looking at her father with pity. She was looking at an obstacle that was finally being removed. Oh, Dad, she sighed dramatically. Look at that. It is okay. We know you are trying. Garris took the paper and made a show of examining it. Well, this is concerning, he said. This indicates significant cognitive impairment, coupled with the reports of aggression and the fire risk. He trailed off, leaving the threat hanging in the air. Reports of aggression, I asked, letting my voice rise. I never hurt anyone. Brittany jumped in. Dad, stop. Don't get agitated again. Remember what happened with Mom yesterday? You were screaming at her. You scared her so much, she locked herself in the bathroom. I looked at my daughter. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. She was gaslighting me in real time, rewriting our history to fit her narrative. I wanted to stand up and shout that I had the recordings. I wanted to play the audio of her screaming at her mother. But I couldn't. Not yet. The trap wasn't fully sprung. Garris closed his file with a snap. Mr. Mercer, based on my observation and the testimony of your primary caregiver, I am recommending an immediate review of your guardianship status. You are displaying clear signs of early-onset Alzheimer's with behavioral disturbances. He turned to Brittany, and his voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. You need to file for emergency temporary custody. He is a danger to himself and your mother. If he controls the finances or the medical decisions, well, it could be catastrophic. Brittany wiped a fake tear from her cheek. Thank you, Mr. Garris. I just want them to be safe. It breaks my heart to do this, but if it is the only way... It is the only way, Garris said, standing up. I will expedite the paperwork. You should have the court order by tomorrow afternoon. He handed her a card. Call this lawyer. He specializes in these transitions. I looked at the card on the table. It wasn't just a lawyer. It was the same firm that represented Todd's shell company. The circle was complete. Garris wasn't just a lazy social worker. He was on the payroll. This was a coordinated strike. As Garris left, Brittany walked him to the door. I heard her whisper, Todd will handle the fee in cash as discussed. I sat alone in the living room listening to the front door close. I felt stripped naked. My intelligence, my dignity, my agency as a human being had just been dismantled in 20 minutes by a man in a cheap suit and a daughter with a shopping addiction. Brittany came back into the room. Her demeanor had changed instantly. The sad daughter act was gone. She looked at me with cold indifference. Well, that went well, she said, picking up the drawings I had made. You should go take a nap, Dad. Todd is coming over later to help you pack some things. We are going to move you into the guest room downstairs. It is safer for you. No stairs. She walked into the kitchen and started making a coffee, humming a tune. She was happy. She thought she had won. I sat there staring at the blank television screen. I wasn't just an old man to them anymore. I was a problem that had been solved, a liability that had been liquidated. But they had made one critical error. They assumed that the man sitting in the chair was the man on the paper. They believed the lie I had sold them. I slowly reached into my pocket and pressed the stop button on the micro recorder hidden in my cardigan. I had every word. I had the lies about the fire. I had the bribe about the cash fee. I had the collusion. You want to declare me incompetent, Brittany, I thought, as I listened to her humming in the kitchen. You want to take away my name. Go ahead. File the papers. Bring the judge. Because when I walk into that courtroom, I won't be Douglas Mercer, the dementia patient. I will be Douglas Mercer, the man who is going to burn your entire world to the ground with the very matches you put in my hand. I closed my eyes and let out a long, slow breath. The humiliation burned like acid in my veins, but I swallowed it down. I would use it as fuel. Tomorrow they would come for the kill, and tomorrow I would be waiting. The drive back from Harper's office felt like a victory lap. The sun was shining on the Connecticut Turnpike, and for the first time in days, I felt a lightness in my chest. Harper had prepared the legal landmines perfectly. We had drafted a revocable trust that would trap Todd and Brittany in a web of litigation the moment they tried to touch a single cent. I had the recordings. I had the bank statements. I was ready to spring the trap. I even stopped at a bakery on Main Street to buy Patricia a slice of lemon cake, her favorite treat. I imagined us sharing it in the sunroom, celebrating a small secret victory before the final battle. But when I turned onto our street, the feeling of triumph evaporated instantly. It was replaced by a cold, primal dread that settled in the base of my spine. The driveway was empty, but there were tire tracks in the gravel. Heavy dual-tread tires, the kind that belonged to a truck or an ambulance. I parked the car crookedly and ran to the front door. It was unlocked. I pushed it open, and the silence of the house hit me like a physical blow. It was not the peaceful silence of an empty afternoon. It was the hollow, echoing silence of a grave. Pat, I called out. My voice cracked. Patricia, are you here? I ran to the sunroom. Her chair was empty. Her knitting basket was overturned on the floor, balls of blue yarn unraveling across the carpet, like spilled intestines. The half-finished puzzle on the table had been knocked askew, as if someone had been dragged away from it. I ran to the kitchen. Empty. I ran upstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time, my bad knee protesting with every impact, but I didn't care. The bedroom was empty. The bathroom was empty. She was gone. I stood in the hallway, breathing hard, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt a wave of dizziness. I grabbed the doorframe to steady myself. Think, Douglas. Think. I went back downstairs to the kitchen. That was when I saw it. A single sheet of yellow legal pad paper sitting in the center of the granite island. It was held down by the salt shaker. I walked toward it, my legs feeling like lead. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Todd's scrawl, jagged and rushed. The note read simply, "Mom had a violent episode. For her safety and ours, we had to call emergency services. She is being held at the Crestview Psychiatric Facility for a 72-hour observation period under state statute. If you want to see her, bring the property deed and the signed power of attorney to my office tomorrow at 9 a.m. Do not bring lawyers. Do not bring police. We just want to help her." I crumpled the note in my fist. Help her? They didn't want to help her. They had kidnapped her. They had used the legal system as a weapon. They had likely told the paramedics she was a danger to herself. They had used the fabricated medical history, the poisoned symptoms from the day before, to convince a doctor to sign an involuntary hold order. It was a kidnapping sanctioned by the state. I pulled out my phone and checked the notification history from the security system. I had been so focused on my meeting with Harper that I had silenced my alerts. There it was. Motion detected at 10:15 a.m. I opened the app and watched the footage. It was the most painful thing I have ever watched in my life. I saw an ambulance pull up. 2 paramedics got out, followed by Todd. He was acting the part of the distraught son, wringing his hands, pointing at the house. They entered. I switched to the interior camera. I saw Patricia sitting in her chair working on her puzzle. She looked up, smiling, expecting me. Instead, she saw strangers. Todd pointed at her. "She has a knife," he shouted. "She threatened to kill us." Patricia didn't have a knife. She had a knitting needle. She held it up, confused. "No, I am making a scarf," she said, her voice trembling. The paramedics didn't wait. They moved in. One of them grabbed her arm. She screamed, "Douglas, help me!" Douglas. I watched my wife of 40 years being strapped to a gurney while she cried out my name. I watched Todd standing in the corner smirking as he signed the transport paperwork. I watched them wheel her out of the house, leaving behind the overturned basket and the silence. I dropped the phone. It clattered onto the tile floor. A sound escaped my throat. It started as a groan and rose into a roar of pure, unadulterated rage. It was a sound I didn't know I was capable of making. It was the sound of a man who had played by the rules his entire life, realizing that the rules no longer applied. I had left her alone. I had been so busy being smart, so busy being a detective, that I had failed to be a husband. I had left her defenseless against wolves. I stumbled into the downstairs bathroom. I needed cold water. I needed to shock myself back into reality. I turned on the faucet and splashed water onto my face. It dripped down my nose, mixing with the sweat and the tears of frustration I refused to let fall. I looked up into the mirror. The man staring back at me looked old. He looked weak. He looked like the victim Todd and Brittany thought he was. He looked like a man who would sign a deed to save his wife. He looked like a man who had lost. I hated him. I pulled my fist back and punched the glass. The sound of the mirror shattering was loud and sharp like a gunshot. Shards of glass rained down into the sink. The reflection fractured into 1,000 jagged pieces. Pain shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back. My knuckles were split and bleeding. Dark red blood dripped onto the pristine white porcelain of the sink. I stared at the blood. It was bright. It was real. The pain was clarifying. It burned away the panic. It burned away the guilt. It burned away the hesitation. I wasn't Douglas Mercer, the retiree, anymore. I wasn't Douglas Mercer, the forensic accountant. I looked at the fractured reflection. The old man was gone. In his place was something else. Something colder. Something harder. They wanted a war. They wanted to use force. They wanted to take the person I loved most in the world and use her as leverage in a negotiation for a house. They had made a fatal error. You do not negotiate with terrorists. You eliminate them. I wrapped a towel around my bleeding hand, pulling it tight until the pressure turned the pain into a dull throb. I walked out of the bathroom and into my study. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. I moved aside the old tax returns and the photo albums. Underneath them was a small black safe box. I dialed in the combination. Inside was a hard drive. Not the one with the camera footage. This was a different drive. It contained the files I had kept from my days at the bureau. The files on favors owed. The files on private investigators who operated in the gray areas of the law. The files on how to dismantle a person's life, not just financially, but completely. I took out the drive. I picked up my phone. I didn't call Harper. Harper was for the law. Where I was going, the law couldn't help me fast enough. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 10 years. A man named Russo who used to find people who didn't want to be found. Mercer Russo's voice rasped on the other end. I thought you were retired. I was. I said, my voice steady and cold like the winter wind. But something came up. I need a team at Crestview Psychiatric within the hour. And Russo bring the jammer. I don't want any cameras working when I get there. I hung up. I walked back to the kitchen and picked up the ransom note. I folded it neatly and put it in my pocket. I would bring it to the meeting tomorrow, but I wouldn't be bringing the deed. I looked at the empty spot where the lemon cake sat on the counter. I am coming for you, Pat, I whispered to the empty room. I walked out of the house. I didn't lock the door. It didn't matter anymore. The house was just wood and stone. My home was in a hospital bed surrounded by strangers, and I was going to burn down the entire city if that was what it took to get her back. The sun had gone down. The sky was dark. It was fitting. The time for daylight and transparency was over. Now we worked in the dark. The house was silent, but it was not empty. It was filled with the ghosts of the memories Todd and Brittany had desecrated. I sat in my study illuminated only by the cold blue glow of my 3 monitors. The shattered mirror in the bathroom was behind me, a testament to the rage I had bottled up. Now that rage had distilled into something far more dangerous. It had become focus. I cracked my knuckles and leaned into the keyboard. The clock on the wall ticked past 2 in the morning. 7 hours until the meeting. 7 hours until I walked into the lion's den. But before I did, I needed to know exactly what was happening inside the cage where they were keeping my wife. Crestview Psychiatric was a private facility. In my experience, private facilities cut corners. They spent money on mahogany desks for the administrators and marble floors for the lobby, but they always skimped on cybersecurity. They assumed that patient privacy laws were a shield that no one would dare to cross. They were wrong. I pulled up the command terminal. I wasn't using the brute force methods of modern hackers. I was using the old tools, the backdoors we used to exploit in the 90s when digital infrastructure was being built by the lowest bidder. I ran a port scan on their external server, just as I suspected. Port 8080 was open for remote maintenance. It took me 20 minutes to bypass the firewall. It was laughably weak. The password for the system administrator account was simply the name of the facility followed by the current year. It was an insult to the concept of security. I was in. I navigated through the digital architecture of the hospital. I found the patient database. I typed in Mercer Patricia. Her file popped up. Status involuntary hold. Reason acute psychotic episode with violent tendencies. I gritted my teeth. Lies. Digital lies stored on a server paid for by my son-in-law's stolen money. I found her room assignment. Room 304, the secure wing. I switched over to the physical security subnet. This was the network that controlled the cameras and the electronic locks. I found the feed for the third-floor hallway. It was stark and white. A nurse sat at a station scrolling through her phone, ignoring the call light blinking above door 302. I clicked on the camera feed for room 304. The image flickered and then stabilized in high-definition black and white. My breath caught in my throat. I felt a physical pain in my chest, as if someone had reached inside and squeezed my heart. Patricia was there. She was lying on a narrow metal bed, but she wasn't sleeping. She was restrained. Thick leather straps bound her wrists and ankles to the frame of the bed. She was spread-eagled like a criminal. Her head was thrashing side to side. I zoomed in. Her mouth was moving. There was no audio on this feed, but I could read her lips. Douglas, Douglas, she was calling for me. I watched as a night orderly walked into the room. He didn't check her vitals. He didn't offer her water. He leaned over the bed and said something that made her flinch. He laughed. It was a casual, cruel laugh. Then he checked the tightness of the straps, pulling them tighter, until I saw Patricia wince in pain. I froze the image. I saved the clip. Then I saved the entire 2-hour buffer. This wasn't just malpractice. This was torture. And it was all the evidence I needed to bypass the local police who might be swayed by Todd's connections or Garris's paperwork. This was a violation of federal patient rights, and given the fraudulent nature of her admission, it was kidnapping across state lines if the funding involved federal insurance, which I knew it did. I closed the window, but I kept the connection open. I routed the feed to my cloud server. I wanted a permanent record of every second she spent in that hell. I picked up my burner phone. It was time to activate the cavalry. I dialed a number that belonged to a man named Miller. Special Agent Miller. We had worked together on the racketeering task force in New York. He was the kind of man who didn't sleep and who hated bullies even more than I did. Miller picked up on the second ring. "Mercer," he said. His voice was gravelly. "It is 3 a.m. You better have a body or a lead." "I have both," I said. "I am sending you a secure packet right now. Check your encrypted email." I heard the click of a mouse on his end. Then silence. A long, heavy silence as he read the files I had compiled. The bank statements showing Todd's money laundering, the wire transfers to the Cayman Islands, the photos of the forgery, and finally the video clip I had just downloaded of an elderly woman tied to a bed. "This is your wife," Miller asked. His voice had lost its edge. It was quiet now. Deadly quiet. "Yes," I said. "They took her yesterday. They are holding her to force me to sign over a $4 million trust fund. The meeting is at 9 a.m. at the son-in-law's office." Miller let out a slow breath. "This is wire fraud, money laundering, elder abuse, kidnapping. And since the bank transfers crossed state lines, we have jurisdiction." "I need a team, Miller," I said. "I don't want local cops. Todd has the local social worker in his pocket." "I need a federal extraction team." "You will have it," Miller said. "I will have a tactical unit staged 2 blocks from the office by 8:30. We will wait for your signal." "What is the trigger?" "I am going to walk in there alone," I said. "I am going to let them think they have won. I am going to let them put the pen in my hand. I want them to admit to everything on tape. When I sign the paper, that is the signal." "But Miller, I need another team at the hospital." "Already on it," Miller replied. "I am dispatching a unit to Crestview. We will secure your wife. Do not worry, Doug. By noon today, these people will wish they had never been born." I hung up. Next, I called Harper. My lawyer answered immediately. He knew tonight was the night. "Is it done?" Harper asked. "The trap is set," I said. "Miller is in. The feds are involved. Now I need to know about the documents. Harper cleared his throat. I spent all night drafting them. The deed looks real. The power of attorney looks real. But the watermark on the paper, Doug, it is specific. In the legal world, it is known as a non-binding draft. It holds no weight in court. But to the naked eye, it looks like an unconditional surrender. Good, I said. And the other document? The confession, Harper said. It is buried in the fine print of the transfer agreement. Clause 17, Section B. By signing as a witness, Todd acknowledges full liability for all outstanding debts and admits to the falsification of medical records. If he signs it, he is signing his own confession. He never reads the fine print, I said. He is too arrogant. Be careful, Doug Harper warned. When you walk into that room, you are defenseless. If they realize you are playing them, I looked at the image of Patricia on my monitor. She had stopped struggling. She was staring up at the ceiling, waiting for a savior who hadn't come yet. I am not defenseless, I said. I have the truth. And tomorrow, truth is going to be wearing a wire. I spent the rest of the night preparing. I showered and shaved, scrubbing the exhaustion from my face. I dressed in my best suit, a charcoal gray wool that I used to wear for grand jury testimonies. I polished my shoes until they shone like obsidian. I stood in front of the mirror in the hallway. I adjusted my tie. I looked at the man in the reflection. He didn't look like a retired grandfather anymore. He looked like an apex predator who had been woken from hibernation. I checked my equipment. The micro recorder in my lapel. The GPS tracker in my shoe. The phone in my pocket linked to Miller's comms frequency. I walked to the kitchen and made a cup of coffee. I drank it standing up, staring at the empty spot where Patricia's tea set used to be. They had taken my peace. They had taken my wife. They had tried to take my dignity. I rinsed the cup and set it in the sink. I walked to the front door and opened it. The sky was turning a bruised purple in the east. The dawn was coming. I stepped out into the cool morning air. I didn't lock the door behind me. I wouldn't need keys where I was going. I got into my car and started the engine. It purred to life. I am coming, Todd, I said to the empty car, and I am bringing hell with me. I pulled out of the driveway and headed toward the city. The road ahead was clear. The destination was justice, and the price of admission was going to be everything they had. The elevator ride to the 30th floor of the Millennium Tower was smooth and silent, a stark contrast to the turbulence churning inside my gut. The doors slid open to reveal a lobby that smelled of expensive leather and intimidation. This was Todd's domain, or rather, it was the domain he rented to convince the world he was a master of the universe. I stepped out onto the plush carpet, allowing my shoulders to slump and my gait to shuffle. I leaned heavily on the cane I had bought at a thrift store an hour ago. To the receptionist, I was just another confused geriatric client lost in the maze of corporate law. To the security camera in the corner, I was a non-threat. I made my way to the double-glass doors at the end of the hall. Through the frosted pane, I could see the silhouettes of the people waiting for me. They looked like vultures perched on a wire waiting for the carcass to cool. I took a deep breath, inhaling the sterile air conditioning, and exhaled the last of my mercy. I pushed the door open. The conference room was vast, designed to make anyone sitting on the opposite side of the table feel small. Todd sat at the head of the table in a high-backed chair that looked like a throne. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, but he wore it badly. He was sweating. A thin sheen of perspiration glistened on his upper lip, and his leg was bouncing under the table. He was a man running out of time. Brittany sat to his right. She didn't look at me as I entered. She was focused on her phone, her thumb scrolling mindlessly, a nervous tic she had developed as a teenager when she was lying. Next to her was Garris, the social worker, looking smug and self-important, with his file folders spread out like a royal flush. But it was the two men on the left side of the table who drew my attention. One was a lawyer I recognized from court records, a man named Steinberg, who had been disbarred twice and reinstated on technicalities. He was the kind of attorney you hired when you needed to bury a body, not write a will. The other man was not a lawyer. He was wearing a suit that was too tight across the shoulders, and his knuckles were scarred. He sat with a stillness that screamed violence. Todd introduced him as Mr. Vance, a potential investor. I knew better. I recognized the tattoo peeking out from under his cuff, a spider web on the wrist. This was the collection agent for the syndicate. He was here to make sure the money was transferred before he broke Todd's legs. "You are late, Doug," Todd snapped, not bothering to stand up. "We have a schedule to keep." "I am sorry," I mumbled, letting my voice waver. "The traffic, and my hip is bothering me today." I shuffled to the single empty chair at the end of the table. It was lower than the others placed intentionally, so I would have to look up at them. I sat down slowly, making a show of arranging my cane and my reading glasses. I saw Mr. Vance check his watch. He gave Todd a look that could have cut glass. "Let us skip the pleasantries," Steinberg said, sliding a thick document across the polished mahogany. "We have prepared the transfer of assets as discussed. This document grants Todd and Brittany full durable power of attorney and immediate control of the Mercer Family Trust, including the real estate portfolio. It also retroactively approves the sale of the primary residence to cover medical expenses." I looked at the stack of papers. It was thick, heavy, and final. It was the instrument of my destruction. Todd leaned forward, his eyes manic. "It is standard procedure, Doug. We just need to liquidate the assets to pay for Mom's care. Crestview is not cheap, you know. We are doing this for her." I looked at Brittany. She finally raised her eyes to meet mine. There was no love there, only a hard glint of greed mixed with fear. She was afraid of the man with the spiderweb tattoo, but she was willing to sacrifice her father to appease him. "Where is she?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I want to know how she is." "She is sedated," Todd said quickly. "She was violent again this morning, Doug. Attacked a nurse. It is better if you don't see her until she is stabilized. Maybe in a week or two. A week or two. In a week or two, they would have drained the accounts, sold the house, and left Patricia to rot in a state ward." I reached out a trembling hand and touched the paper. I felt the texture of the bond. Harper had done a magnificent job. To the untrained eye, it looked like a standard legal contract. But I knew the secrets hidden in the watermark. "I cannot sign this," I said, pulling my hand back. The room went deadly silent. Mr. Vance shifted in his seat, and the leather creaked loudly. Todd's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. "What did you say?" Todd hissed, standing up. "I cannot sign this," I repeated, looking down at my hands. "Not until I know she is okay. You took her away. You didn't even let me say goodbye." Brittany slammed her hand on the table. "Oh, for God's sake, Dad, stop being so dramatic. She is in a hospital, not a dungeon. Just sign the damn paper so we can pay the bills. Do you want them to kick her out onto the street?" I looked at the man with the spiderweb tattoo. I looked him right in the eye. He didn't blink. He knew what was at stake. He knew that without this signature, he wasn't getting his $500,000. "I need to see her," I said, letting a tear roll down my cheek. "Just let me see her once. If I can see her, if I can hold her hand, I will sign everything. The house, the stocks, the pension. Take it all. I just want my wife." Todd looked at Steinberg. Steinberg shrugged. It was a calculated risk. Todd looked at Mr. Vance. The muscle man gave a barely perceptible nod. He didn't care about the emotional theatrics, he just wanted the deal closed. "Fine," Todd spat. He pulled out his phone. "I will FaceTime the doctor. You can see her on the screen. That is the best I can do." He dialed a number. A moment later, he turned the phone around. The screen showed a sterile white room. Patricia was lying in bed. Her eyes were closed. She looked pale and small, but she was breathing. See, Todd said, pulling the phone away before I could get a good look. She is resting. She is safe. Now pick up the pen, Doug. Or so help me God, I will have Garris file the incompetency order right now, and you will never see her again. It was the ultimate threat, the nuclear option. I let out a shuddering breath. I reached into my jacket pocket. I saw Mr. Vance tense up, expecting a weapon. Instead, I pulled out my own pen, an old silver fountain pen that Patricia had given me for our 25th anniversary. I uncapped it slowly. My hand shook violently. I looked at Brittany one last time, giving her a final chance to be a human being. Brittany, I said softly, are you sure about this? Once I sign this, there is no going back. Just sign it, Dad, she said, looking at the window, avoiding my gaze. Stop making this harder than it has to be. I nodded. I accepted my fate, or at least the fate they thought I was accepting. I bent over the document. The text blurred before my eyes, not from tears, but from the sheer intensity of the adrenaline flooding my system. This was the kill zone. I placed the nib of the pen on the signature line. The ink bled slightly into the paper. I promise you, Todd. I said, my voice suddenly steadying, losing the tremor, losing the age, losing the weakness. I promise you that you are going to get exactly what you deserve. Todd laughed, a nervous cackling sound. Yeah, Doug. Just write your name. I started to write, but I didn't write Douglas Mercer. I wrote carefully and clearly in block letters, and as the ink dried on the page, I felt the shift in the room. They were so focused on the tip of my pen, they didn't notice that I had stopped shaking. They didn't notice that my posture had straightened. They didn't notice that the broken old man had just left the building and the hunter had taken his place. I finished the last letter and capped the pen with a loud, definitive click. There, I said, pushing the document toward Todd. It is done. Todd grabbed the paper, his eyes wide with avarice. He didn't even look at the signature at first. He just hugged the folder to his chest like a child with a prize. Mr. Vance relaxed, leaning back in his chair. Steinberg started packing up his briefcase. Brittany let out a long exhale of relief. They thought it was over. I checked my watch. 9:15 a.m. The signal had been sent. I looked at the door. I counted down in my head. 3, 2, 1. Todd looked down at the paper to verify the signature. His smile froze. His brow furrowed. What is this? He whispered. What the hell is this? Read it out loud. Todd. I said, my voice filling the room with command presence. Read what I signed. Todd looked up at me, and for the first time he saw the real Douglas Mercer. He saw the cold, dead eyes of a man who used to hunt monsters for a living. He looked back at the paper. His hands started to shake. RICO Act violation. He read, his voice trembling. I smiled. And it wasn't a nice smile. That is not a signature, Todd, I said, standing up and kicking the cane away. That is a confession, and you just accepted it into evidence. Before he could scream, before Mr. Vance could reach for the gun I knew he had in his waistband, the glass doors of the conference room exploded inward. The game was over. The slaughter was about to begin. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning unit and the rapid, shallow breathing of my son-in-law. Todd was staring at the tip of my pen, his eyes wide and hungry, like a shark smelling blood in the water. Brittany was smirking, a small, tight expression of triumph that she couldn't quite suppress. She thought she had won. She thought the old man was finally bending the knee. I held the silver fountain pen, hovering just millimeters above the signature line. It was a heavy instrument, cold and solid in my hand. It felt less like a pen and more like the trigger of a loaded shotgun. I looked up one last time, scanning the faces of the people who had conspired to destroy my life. Steinberg, the lawyer, was already mentally spending his commission. Mr. Vance, the enforcer, was leaning back, relaxing his guard, believing the debt was as good as paid. Garris, the corrupt social worker, was checking his watch, probably late for his next bribe. I looked at Brittany. I wanted to see if there was any hesitation, any flicker of remorse for selling her parents down the river. There was none. She just tapped her manicured fingernail on the table impatiently. "Sign it, Dad," she said, her voice sharp. "We don't have all day." I nodded slowly. "You are right, Brittany. We don't have all day. In fact, you don't have any time left at all." I pressed the nib to the paper. The ink flowed black and permanent. Todd leaned in so close I could smell his nervous sweat mixed with expensive cologne. He was trying to read upside down, desperate to see the letters of my name. But I didn't write Douglas. With a steady hand, the hand of a man who had spent 30 years documenting crimes for the federal government, I wrote a different set of words. I wrote them in clear block letters that were impossible to misinterpret. Money. Laundering. I paused. I felt Todd stiffen beside me. He had seen the first word. Confusion rippled off him in waves. I continued writing. Title 18 USC. I finished the citation with a flourish, underlining it twice. Then I capped the pen. The click sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. I slid the folder across the polished mahogany table toward Todd. "There," I said, leaning back in my chair. "It is signed." Todd grabbed the document. He looked at it. He blinked. He looked at it again. His brain refused to process what his eyes were seeing. He was expecting a surrender. Instead, he was looking at a federal indictment code. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "What is this, Doug? This isn't your name." I smiled. It was a cold smile, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "No, Todd. That is not my name. That is your future." Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1956. Laundering of monetary instruments. Penalty up to 20 years in federal prison. Steinberg sat up straight, his face draining of color. Mr. Vance stopped, leaning back. His hand moved instinctively toward his waistband. Brittany snatched the paper from Todd's hands. "What are you talking about, Dad? Just sign the paper properly. Stop playing games." "I am not playing games, Brittany," I said, standing up. "I stopped playing games the moment you tied your mother to a bed." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't unlock it. I just pressed the volume up button 3 times. It was a pre-programmed macro command. On the far wall of the conference room, the massive 60-inch monitor that was used for client presentations suddenly flickered to life. I had breached their internal network hours ago, replacing their splash screen with a live feed from my private server. The room was bathed in the harsh blue light of the screen. Brittany gasped. Todd froze. The video playing was the footage from camera 4. It was the footage from the kitchen. It was high definition, and the audio was crystal clear. On the screen, a giant version of Todd was smashing the antique teapot. A giant version of Brittany was slapping her mother across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the conference room, amplified by the surround sound speakers. "Don't you dare walk away from me!" the Brittany on the screen screamed. The real Brittany put her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. She wasn't horrified by her actions. She was horrified that they were being seen. Mr. Vance stood up slowly. He looked at the screen, then he looked at Todd. "You told me it was a family dispute," Vance said, his voice low and dangerous. "You didn't tell me you were beating up old ladies. This kind of heat. I don't need this kind of heat." "Sit down," I commanded. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of authority. I wasn't finished. I pressed the button on my phone again. The video changed. Now it was the footage from the hospital room. The footage from last night. Patricia tied to the bed, thrashing in pain, calling my name while the orderly laughed. Steinberg, the lawyer, stood up and started shoving papers into his briefcase. I am leaving. I was not aware of the physical abuse. I am recusing myself immediately. You aren't going anywhere, Steinberg, I said. You are an officer of the court, and you conspired to facilitate this. You are an accessory. Todd finally found his voice. Turn it off, he screamed, lunging for the remote control on the table. It is a fake. It is a deep fake. He is good with computers. He made it up. I grabbed his wrist before he could touch the remote. My grip was iron. I twisted his arm and shoved him back into his chair. I am not done, Todd, I said. I have one more thing to show you, or rather, to show Brittany. I reached into my inside jacket pocket. Brittany was shaking, crying hysterically, mumbling that it wasn't her fault that she was forced to do it. She was looking at Todd for salvation. She still thought they were partners in crime. She still thought they were a team fighting against the cruel world. I threw the stack of photographs onto the table. They fanned out perfectly, like a royal flush. The photos from the Sapphire Towers. The photos of Todd kissing the blonde woman. The photos of him holding hands with her. The close-up of the credit card bill. The timestamp showed it was yesterday. The exact same time Brittany was at the pharmacy picking up the sedatives to poison her mother. I watched the realization hit Brittany. It was slower than the other reactions. She looked at the photos. She recognized the woman. She recognized the bag the woman was holding, the same bag she had wanted, but Todd said they couldn't afford. She picked up a photo. Her hands were trembling so hard the paper rattled. Todd, she whispered. Who is this? Todd turned pale. He tried to grab the photos, but I blocked him. That is where the money went, Brittany, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. The $500,000 debt wasn't just gambling. It was her. He promised her a penthouse. He promised her a trip to Paris. He told her he was going to put you and me in a nursing home so he could run away with her. Todd stammered. Baby number. That is a client. Doug is lying. He is trying to divide us. Brittany looked at the photo. Then she looked at the video of her mother tied to a bed on the screen. Then she looked at her husband. Something inside her snapped. It was audible. A psychic break that shattered the veneer of the suburban housewife. She didn't scream like a human being. She screamed like a wounded animal. You bastard, she shrieked. She launched herself across the table. She didn't go for his face. She went for his throat. Her manicured nails, the ones she spent thousands of dollars on, became claws. She dug them into Todd's face, drawing deep red lines down his cheeks. Todd yelled in pain and tried to push her off, but she was fueled by the rage of a woman scorned and a daughter realizing she had sold her soul for nothing. They crashed into the floor. The expensive leather chairs toppled over. Get off me, you crazy witch, Todd shouted, punching blindly. I stood there watching them. It was a scene from hell. Husband and wife rolling on the floor of a high-rise office, tearing each other apart, while the video of their crimes played on a loop above them. Mr. Vance looked at me. He shook his head. I am out, he said, backing toward the door. I am not getting involved in a domestic. You are not going anywhere either, I said calmly. I walked to the window and pulled back the heavy curtains. Down below on the street, blinking red and blue lights reflected off the glass of the surrounding skyscrapers. Not one police car, not two, a dozen. And among them were the black SUVs of the federal task force. I turned back to the room. The chaos was absolute. Brittany was sobbing and pounding her fists on Todd's chest. Todd was bleeding and trying to crawl away. Steinberg was huddled in the corner, trying to delete files from his phone. Garris was trying to open the locked door, but his hands were shaking too much to work the handle. I adjusted my cuffs. I felt a profound sense of peace. I looked at the camera lens hidden in the smoke detector of the conference room. I knew Miller was watching. I knew he was giving the go order right now. I picked up the fountain pen from the table, the pen that had signed their death warrant. I put it back in my pocket. Todd managed to push Brittany off. He scrambled to his knees, looking up at me, his face smeared with blood and mascara. "Doug, please," he begged. "We can fix this. I can explain." I looked down at him. He looked so small. "Explain it to the judge, Todd," I said. And then the doors exploded. This time it wasn't me opening them. It was a battering ram. Federal agents in tactical gear flooded the room. Their voices were loud, commanding, and precise. "FBI, get down. Hands where we can see them." Vance was tackled before he could draw his weapon. Steinberg was handcuffed against the wall. Garris was pulled away from the door, crying like a child. And Todd and Brittany, huddled together on the floor, not in love but in shared terror, were pulled apart and cuffed. I stood still in the center of the storm. An agent approached me. He recognized me. He nodded respectfully. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "we have the perimeter secured. Agent Miller is at the hospital. Your wife is safe." I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 3 days. Safe. I watched as they dragged my daughter out of the room. She looked back at me. Her eyes were black holes of despair. "Dad, help me," she wailed. I didn't look away, but I didn't step forward. "You made your choice, Brittany," I said softly. I watched the elevator doors close on them. The room was suddenly empty, except for me and a few agents collecting evidence. The video on the screen was still playing. I picked up the remote and turned it off. The screen went black. The show was over. I walked out of the office, leaving the shattered glass and the ruined lives behind me. I had a date with my wife, and this time no one was going to keep me from her. The explosion of the conference room doors was not just a sound, it was a physical force that reset the atmosphere in the room instantly. 1 second, Todd and Brittany were tearing each other apart on the floor like rabid animals, and the next, they were freezing in place as the reality of their situation marched through the shattered glass. "FBI, get down. Federal agents, get on the ground now." The command was shouted by 6 voices in perfect unison. It was a beautiful sound, the symphony of justice arriving precisely on time. Men in heavy tactical gear, with FBI emblazoned in yellow across their chests, poured into the room, moving with the fluid lethality of a pack of wolves. Todd scrambled backward on his hands and knees, his face smeared with blood from where Brittany had scratched him. He looked up at the agents, his eyes wide with a confusion that was rapidly turning into terror. "Don't shoot!" he screamed, holding his hands up. "I am a businessman. This is a misunderstanding." An agent didn't pause to listen to his lies. He advanced on Todd, kicking his legs out from under him and driving him flat against the expensive carpet. "Todd Thompson, you are under arrest for money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse." The agent pulled Todd's arms behind his back. The zip ties cinched tight with a sound like a zipper closing on a body bag. Todd yelped in pain. "My shoulder, watch my shoulder," he whined. I watched from my spot by the window. I felt nothing for him, no pity, no satisfaction, just the cold, clinical observation of a pest being removed from the premises. Across the room, Brittany was hysterical. 2 female agents were pulling her up from the floor. She was crying so hard she couldn't breathe, hyperventilating in short, sharp gasps. "Dad," she screamed, looking past the agents toward me. "Dad, tell them. Tell them I didn't know. Tell them Todd made me do it." I looked at my daughter. The mascara was running down her face in black rivers. Her designer dress was torn at the shoulder. She looked like a child who had broken a vase and was terrified of the punishment, but she was a 40-year-old woman who had helped tie her own mother to a hospital bed. I stayed silent. My silence was the only answer she deserved. Brittany Mercer. You are under arrest for kidnapping, false imprisonment, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The agent, reading her rights, said, her voice devoid of emotion. No, no, no. Brittany wailed as the handcuffs clicked onto her wrists. I have a child. You cannot take me. I have a son. You should have thought about that before you tried to orphan him, I thought to myself. In the corner, Garris, the corrupt social worker, was trying to make himself invisible. He was huddled under the table, clutching his briefcase to his chest like a shield. Agent Miller walked into the room. He was wearing a windbreaker and looked every bit the weary veteran lawman I remembered. He spotted Garris immediately. He walked over and tapped the table with his knuckles. Mr. Garris Miller said, his voice calm but hard as granite. We have your bank records. We have the wire transfer from Todd's shell company to your personal account. $5,000 to falsify a competency report. That is a federal crime, son. Garris looked up, tears streaming down his face. I just needed the money, he sobbed. My wife, she is sick. We all have problems, Miller said, hauling him to his feet. But we don't all sell old people down the river to fix them. Cuff him. Steinberg, the lawyer, was the only one who wasn't screaming. He was standing against the wall, his face the color of ash. He knew the law. He knew exactly how much trouble he was in. When the agent approached him, he turned around and put his hands behind his back without a word. He was already calculating his plea deal, but I knew Miller. Miller wouldn't give him one. Steinberg was going to lose his license, his freedom, and his reputation. Mr. Vance, the tough guy enforcer, was on his stomach. His face pressed into the floor by the boot of a particularly large agent. The spiderweb tattoo on his wrist was now hidden by steel cuffs. He wasn't so scary now without his leverage. The room was a chaos of shouting commands and crying suspects. But in the center of it all, I stood untouched. An agent approached me. It was a young man, probably the same age Todd was when I first met him. Mr. Mercer, he said respectfully. We need to clear the room. Are you injured? I shook my head. I am fine, son. I just need a moment. I walked over to where Todd was lying on the floor. An agent was patting him down, emptying his pockets. His phone, his wallet, and the keys to the luxury car he couldn't afford were placed in an evidence bag. Todd looked up at me. He tried to muster some of his old arrogance, but it crumbled instantly. Doug, help me, he whispered. I can fix this. I know people. I can pay you back. I swear I can pay you back. I looked down at him. I remembered the day he asked for Brittany's hand in marriage. I remembered how he swore to protect her. I remembered how he looked me in the eye 5 years ago when I bailed out his first failed company and promised he would never gamble again. And I remembered the video of him smashing the teapot and threatening my wife with a jagged shard of porcelain. I reached up and adjusted my tie, tightening the knot. I smoothed down the lapels of my suit. You cannot pay me back, Todd, I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the room. Because you are bankrupt. Not just financially. You are morally bankrupt. I leaned down close so only he could hear me. I taught you how to read a balance sheet, Todd. I taught you how to spot an opportunity. I taught you how to build wealth. Todd nodded eagerly, thinking I was offering him a lifeline. Yes, Doug. Yes, you did. I stood back up and looked at him with pure disgust. Well, today I am teaching you one last lesson, I said. Today I am teaching you how to do time. Take him away, I said to the agent. The agent hauled Todd to his feet. As they dragged him out, he started screaming my name, cursing me, calling me a monster. You are the monster, Doug, he yelled, his voice cracking. You planned this whole thing. You are sick. Maybe I was. Maybe you have to be a little sick to cut out a tumor without anesthesia. But the patient was going to survive, and that was all that mattered. Brittany was led past me next. She didn't scream. She just looked at me with dead eyes. "Daddy," she whispered. I turned my back on her. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Every instinct in my body screamed to protect my child, to make it better, to pay the lawyers and hush it up. But I knew that if I did that, I would be killing her soul. She needed to face the consequences. She needed to hit rock bottom before she could ever hope to climb out. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. I saw them being loaded into the back of the black SUVs. The flashing lights painted the city walls in red and blue strobes. Miller walked up beside me. "We got the call from the hospital team," he said quietly. "They have secured Patricia. The doctor on duty has been detained for questioning regarding the falsified admission papers. Your wife is being transported to St. Mary's right now for a full checkup. She is safe, Doug." I nodded, but I couldn't speak. The lump in my throat was too large. "You did good," Miller said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "You took down a whole ring today. That lawyer Steinberg has been on our radar for years. We just never had the smoking gun." "I didn't do it for the Bureau," I said, my voice raspy. "I did it for her." "I know," Miller said. "Go to her, Doug. We will handle the paperwork." I walked out of the office. I walked past the empty receptionist desk. I walked into the elevator. When the doors closed and I was finally alone, I let out a long, shuddering breath. My knees felt weak. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. I looked at my reflection in the polished metal of the elevator doors. I looked old. I looked tired. But for the first time in months, I didn't look like a victim. I unbuttoned my jacket. I loosened my tie. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old flip phone I used for emergencies. I dialed the number for the flower shop on 5th Avenue. "Hello," the clerk answered. "I need a delivery," I said. "To St. Mary's Hospital." "Room?" I paused, realizing I didn't know her new room number yet. "Just send them to the front desk for Patricia Mercer." "What kind of flowers, sir?" "Yellow roses," I said. 5 dozen of them. And a card. What should the card say? Just right. "I am coming home." I hung up the phone as the elevator reached the lobby. I walked out into the bright morning sun. The air smelled of exhaust fumes and hot asphalt, but to me it smelled like freedom. I hailed a cab. "St. Mary's Hospital, please," I told the driver. "And step on it." As the cab merged into traffic, I closed my eyes. The war was over. The enemy was in chains. Now the rebuilding could begin. But first, I had to hold my wife's hand and promise her that no one would ever hurt her again. And this time, it was a promise backed by the full weight of the federal government and the unyielding rage of a husband who had been pushed too far. 3 months later, the federal courthouse smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. It was a cold, antiseptic smell that stuck to the back of your throat. I sat in the front row of the gallery, my hands folded in my lap. The seat beside me was empty. Patricia had wanted to come. She had wanted to look them in the eye one last time, but I insisted she stay home. Her heart was healing physically, but the emotional scar tissue was still too fresh. I would not let them see the damage they had inflicted. I would not give them that satisfaction. The bailiff called the court to order. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the defendants were led in. Todd walked in first. He looked like a ghost of the man who had sat in that high-rise office. His hair was shaved close to his scalp, and his expensive suit had been replaced by a prison uniform that hung loosely on his frame. He didn't look at the gallery. He stared at the floor, his shoulders hunched in defeat. The arrogance had been stripped away, leaving only a hollow shell of a man who realized too late that he wasn't as smart as he thought he was. Then came Brittany. Seeing my daughter in shackles was a physical blow. It hit me right in the chest, knocking the wind out of me for a second. She looked small. She looked young. Without the makeup and the designer clothes, she looked like the teenager who used to ask me for help with her math homework. Her eyes were red and swollen. When she saw me sitting there, her face crumbled. She mouthed the word "daddy" and started to weep. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times before. It was the same cry she used when she wanted a new car. It was the same cry she used when she wanted me to bail Todd out of his first bankruptcy. But this time the stakes were not a credit card bill. The stakes were her life. The proceedings were swift. The evidence gathered by the task force was overwhelming. The forensic accounting trail I had uncovered was a map that led straight to their guilt. There was no way to argue against the wire transfers, the forged documents, or the video footage of abuse. Steinberg, the lawyer, had already turned state's evidence to save his own skin, testifying against them to reduce his sentence. When the time came for sentencing, Brittany's public defender stood up. He was a young man doing his best with a bad hand. "Your Honor," he said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "My client asks for leniency. She was coerced. She was manipulated by a domineering husband. But more importantly, she is a mother." Brittany stood up then. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled photograph. It was a picture of my grandson, Leo. She held it up toward me, pressing it against her chest. "Dad, please," she sobbed, her voice cracking with desperation. "Do it for Leo. He is only 7. He needs his mother. Don't let him grow up thinking his mother is a criminal. If you write a letter to the judge asking for probation, if you tell them you forgive me, they might let me go home. Please, Dad, don't punish Leo for my mistakes." The courtroom fell silent. All eyes turned to me. The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked down at me. "Mr. Mercer," the judge said, "as the primary victim along with your wife, you have the right to address the court. Does the prosecution have a statement from you regarding sentencing?" I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my spine was steel. I looked at Brittany. I looked at the photo of my grandson in her hands. She was using him as a human shield. She was hiding behind the innocence of a child she was willing to bankrupt to feed her own vanity. I walked to the podium. I adjusted the microphone. I looked at Todd, who was refusing to meet my gaze. Then I looked directly at my daughter. "I loved you, Brittany," I said, my voice steady and low. "I loved you more than I loved my own life. When you were born, I promised to protect you from the world." Brittany nodded eagerly, tears streaming down her face, hope igniting in her eyes. "Yes, Daddy, I know." But I continued, my voice hardening. "I also made a vow to protect your mother. And I made a vow to raise a daughter who knew right from wrong. I failed in that second vow." I took a breath. The air in the room felt thin. "You ask me to think of Leo. I am thinking of him. I am thinking that if I let him be raised by a woman who would tie her own mother to a bed and drug her for money, then I am condemning him to become just like you. I am thinking that the safest place for my grandson is as far away from your influence as possible until you learn what it means to be a human being." Brittany's face fell. The hope vanished, replaced by shock. "You ask for mercy," I said, turning to the judge. "You ask for forgiveness because we are family. But family is not a suicide pact." I gripped the sides of the podium. "Your Honor, I have spent my life chasing criminals. I have learned one universal truth. Tolerance for evil is cruelty to oneself, and mercy to the unrepentant is an act of violence against the innocent. If I ask for leniency today, I am not being a good father. I am being an accomplice to the next crime she commits." I looked back at Brittany one last time. "You didn't cry when you slapped your mother. You didn't cry when you stole our life savings. You are only crying now because you got caught. That is not remorse, Brittany. That is just calculation, and I am done paying for your calculations." I sat down. Brittany let out a wail that sounded like an animal caught in a trap. She slumped against her lawyer, unable to stand. Todd finally looked at me, and in his eyes I saw pure, unadulterated hatred. It was the most honest look he had given me in 10 years. The judge cleared her throat. She shuffled her papers. "The court thanks you for your statement, Mr. Mercer," she said. She turned to the defendants. "Todd Thompson, for the crimes of money laundering, wire fraud, and aggravated elder abuse, I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole." Todd's head dropped to the table. An audible gasp went through the room. "Brittany Mercer," the judge continued, "for the crimes of conspiracy, kidnapping, and fraud, I sentence you to 8 years in federal prison." "No," Brittany screamed. "No, please. My son. My baby." The gavel came down with a finality tone that shook the room. I watched as the marshals moved in. They pulled Todd to his feet. He looked old. He looked broken. They grabbed Brittany. She was dead weight, screaming for her father, reaching out her hands toward me. "Dad, help me. Daddy, please." I didn't look away. I owed it to her to watch. I owed it to Patricia to watch. I watched until the heavy side doors swallowed them up. I watched until their voices faded into the corridor. I watched until the silence returned to the courtroom. I stood up and buttoned my jacket. I felt a strange emptiness inside me. It wasn't happiness. You cannot be happy when your child goes to prison. But it was peace. It was the knowledge that the rot had been cut out. I walked out of the courthouse alone. The sun was shining outside, blindingly bright, after the dim light of the courtroom. I took a deep breath of the city air. I had a grandson to pick up from school. I had a wife waiting for me at home. I had a garden that needed tending. My life was smaller now. My table was emptier. But it was clean. And as I walked down the steps of the courthouse, I knew that for the first time in years, I was walking toward a future that belonged to me. Prison takes a man's freedom, but poverty takes his legacy. The judge had given Todd and Brittany years behind bars, but it was the forensic accountants who delivered the final blow to their egos. In the weeks following the sentencing, I watched from a distance as the empire of lies they had built crumbled into dust. Todd's assets were the first to go. It turned out he didn't really own anything. His luxury car was a lease which was repossessed in the middle of the night. His office furniture was rented. His expensive watches were revealed to be high-quality knockoffs when the marshals tried to auction them. The only thing Todd actually owned was debt. Massive, crushing debt that was now being written off by banks that would never recover a cent. But the centerpiece of their downfall was Brittany's house. It was a sprawling McMansion in a gated community, a monument to vanity that she couldn't afford. She had bought it to impress neighbors she didn't like and to house parties she couldn't pay for. Now, with both of them in federal custody and the mortgage payments 3 months behind the bank, moved in with predatory speed. The foreclosure sign went up on the lawn. It was a bright orange sticker that screamed failure to the entire neighborhood. I drove past it once. I saw the neighbors stopping to take pictures. I saw the overgrown lawn. It looked like a corpse that had been left to rot. A month later, the property went up for public auction. These auctions are usually grim affairs held on the courthouse steps, attended by sharks looking to flip properties for a quick profit. I decided to attend. I wore my old fishing hat and a nondescript jacket. I stood in the back of the crowd, quietly observing. The opening bid was low. The house had liens against it, and the market was soft. The sharks circled, raising their paddles in small increments. 200,000, 210. I waited. I waited until the bidding stalled. I waited until the auctioneer raised his gavel to close the sale. Then I raised my hand. $300,000, I said, my voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. Cash. The auctioneer looked at me. The other bidders turned around. They saw an old man and assumed I was confused, but the certified check in my pocket was very real. Sold to the gentleman in the back. I walked up the steps and signed the papers. I didn't buy it because I wanted to live there. I bought it because I wanted to purify it. The day I got the keys, I walked through the empty rooms of my daughter's house. It smelled of stale perfume and abandonment. I walked into the master bedroom where she had likely planned the kidnapping of her mother. I walked into the dining room where she had hosted dinners paid for with my stolen money. It felt cold. It felt hollow. I called a contractor the next day. I didn't ask for a restoration. I asked for a transformation. Tear out the marble floors I ordered. They are too slippery. Install non-slip vinyl. Remove the crystal chandeliers. Put in bright LED lighting. Widen the doorways for wheelchair access. Install ramps over the stairs. The contractor looked at me confused. "What are you building, Mr. Mercer?" "I am building a sanctuary," I told him. I spent the next 2 months overseeing the construction. I used the money from the settlement I received from Todd's remaining liquidated assets. It was poetic justice. His money was paying to dismantle his own house. When the work was done, I placed a new sign on the front lawn. It wasn't a for sale sign. It was a brass plaque. The Mercer Haven, a community support center for the elderly. I had turned Brittany's temple of vanity into a home for the very people she despised. The living room where she judged her guests was now a common area where seniors could play chess and socialize without fear of loneliness. The kitchen where she wasted food was now a cafeteria serving hot meals to pensioners who struggled to buy groceries. The master bedroom, her sanctuary of greed, was converted into a medical triage room where visiting nurses provided free checkups. On the opening day, Patricia and I stood on the front porch. She looked at the bustling center filled with laughter and life. "She would hate this," Patricia said, softly squeezing my hand. "I know," I replied. She thought old people were useless. She thought we were a burden. Now her house is proving her wrong every single day. I looked at the brass plaque one last time. I had erased her legacy of selfishness and replaced it with a legacy of service. The house wasn't a symbol of failure anymore. It was a symbol of survival. We walked down the steps to our car, leaving the past behind us. We had lost a daughter, but we had gained a purpose. And in the end, that was a trade I was willing to make. The financial ruin of my enemies was complete, but the spiritual restoration of my family had just begun. 6 months have passed since the gavel fell in that courtroom. The only sound I hear now is the wind rustling through the maple trees and the rhythmic clicking of Patricia's knitting needles. We are sitting on this porch of our new home, a smaller cottage by the lake, far away from the city and far away from the memories of betrayal. The sun is setting, casting a golden light over the water, and for the first time in a long time, the silence around us does not feel heavy. It feels like a warm blanket. Patricia is sitting in the rocking chair beside me. She looks beautiful. The pallor of the sedatives is gone, replaced by the rosy glow of health and fresh air. She is working on a yellow scarf, the same color as the roses I sent to her hospital room. She catches me watching her and smiles. It is a genuine smile, one that reaches her eyes. There is no confusion there anymore. There is no fear. Just the clear, sharp intelligence of the woman I married 40 years ago. We do not talk about Brittany or Todd. We do not accept the collect calls from the federal penitentiary. We do not open the letters that arrive with the prison stamp on the envelope. Some people might think we are cold. They might say that a parent's love should be unconditional, that we should offer forgiveness no matter the sin. But those people have never looked into the eyes of their own child and seen a predator looking back. I have learned that forgiveness is something you give to someone who makes a mistake. It is not something you give to someone who plots your destruction. By closing the door on them, I did not shut out my family. I shut out the draft that was freezing our souls. We are alone now in the traditional sense. There will be no Thanksgiving dinners with a large table full of grandchildren. There will be no family reunions. But we are not lonely. We have found a new community at the support center. We have neighbors who wave to us not because they want something, but because they are kind. We have each other. I reach out and take Patricia's hand. Her grip is strong. "Do you regret it, Doug?" she asks softly, looking out at the water. "Do you regret turning them in?" I look at the scars on my knuckles from the day I punched the mirror. They have faded to faint white lines. I regret that we had to do it, I say, but I do not regret that we survived. I sip my coffee. It tastes better now that I am not drinking it to stay awake for a war. This experience has taught me the most important lesson of my life. We grow up believing that family is the blood that flows in our veins. We are told that DNA is a binding contract that cannot be broken, but that is a lie. Family is not the people who share your last name. Family is the people who hold your hand when the doctor gives you bad news. Family is the people who stand beside you when the world turns against you. Family is not about biology. It is about behavior. It is about how we treat each other when the storm comes. Todd and Brittany were my relatives, but they were never my family. I am Douglas Mercer. I am 72 years old. I have lost a daughter, but I have saved my dignity. I have lost a fortune in legal fees, but I have bought my freedom. I squeeze my wife's hand, and she squeezes back. The sun dips below the horizon, and the first stars appear. We are safe. We are at peace. And that is worth more than any trust fund in the world. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it gives you the strength to look at your own life and ask the hard questions. Are you holding on to toxic people just because of history? Do you have the courage to cut the ties that bind you to pain? Let me know in the comments below what you would have done in my place. Would you have forgiven them? Or would you have done exactly what I did? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice and truth. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember to protect the ones who truly love you. Goodbye.
껌이랑
아.
그냥 냅두고 있는 거야.
오면 잡자?
그냥 오면 잡자. 뭐 보이면 잡아. 이런.
여기 어디요?
아, 네, 여기 세워주세요, 그러면은. 감사합니다.
요건데 요거로 나오는데.
네. 이 카드 야래? 아, 이거 내가.
자동에
거랑.
자동에 놨네. 예, 그리 안 내려져요?
네.
감사합니다.
그래 이쪽으로 내리시고.
네. 감사합니다. 네.
이쪽 골목인 거야. 일단은 건물 한번
두근두근 메이드 카페?
두근두근 메이드 카페? 네? 메이드 카페가 있네요. 오일이? 오일이? 왜 오일 아니죠? 어디?